This is Harvestella. So first off, a thanks to Square Enix for providing me with a key for this. They shot me one so that I could actually take a look at it, which was very nice of them, so thank you very much. Harvestella is a new entry in a genre that pretty much only one other series has actually tried before, that being the Rune Factory games. Effectively, Final Fantasy meets Harvest Moon, basically. They are a combination of the Story of Seasons, Harvest Moon, Stardew Valley life sim style thing, where you have a farm and you have various relationships with other characters and all that sort of stuff, with a more traditional JRPG, dungeon delving, boss fighting, party composing sort of idea. So it's like a JRPG meets a life sim. And like I said, pretty much only the Rune Factory games have really tried this to any degree of success before, so it's really cool to see another company actually try their hand at it and see what they can do. And I've actually enjoyed my time with it quite a bit so far. I have a lot of good things to say about it, but I also do have one pretty major overarching criticism that I'll get to a little bit later. So first off, how does the game actually play? Well, obviously the whole thing is pretty evenly split in between two sections. You have your life sim farm management section and your dungeon delving JRPG section. And they do actually have a fair bit of crossover because a lot of the relationships that you have to advance and things are your actual party members themselves. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And of course you'll also be finding a lot of things to help you in your farm while dungeon delving, like various rare seeds and saplings and things like that to plant. But let's start off with the actual farm section, because you do of course spend a lot of time doing this. It works in a very similar way to what you'll be used to if you've ever played like Stardew Valley or any game like that, with a couple of interesting differences. So one of the big differences you'll notice first off is you don't have a whole bunch of different tools on a hotbar that you use on specific things. Instead you have a multi-tool that does everything and you just switch modes. So it is a watering can, it's also a hoe for tilling the ground, it's also a hammer for breaking rocks, it's even a sword or a staff for when you're in the battle sections of the game, so it can be everything, which is actually kind of a nice feature. This isn't something that would fit every life sim. It's nice having multiple tools to upgrade in others, but in terms of this game, it actually feels pretty good to have a sort of mode switching tool, because it does feel like some streamlining without taking away a bunch of depth, which I do appreciate, and it fits with the theme of the game, with you being this sort of outsider character from who knows where, with this somewhat crazy technology that people don't fully understand, and I actually think that they did a good job of modeling this multi-tool and making it look really cool, and all the different forms you can transform into. But of course, to start off, you'll need to clear off the rocks with your hammer mode from the patch of land that you have access to plant on, and then once you've cleared off some space, you can till the ground to get the ground ready for seeds, and then of course plant your seeds, and then water them and wait. So it all works pretty much exactly like you would think. There's not a whole lot you can do with, growing stuff in the ground. It tends to work in a pretty specific way, pretty much no matter what game you're playing. That's just how it is. But of course, different seeds do have different requirements. Some, of course, will only grow in certain seasons, while others may actually be harvestable multiple times, and some take a really long time to grow, while others are very quick. And then you will be harvesting all of your plants once they're available, and then either selling off your crops in the shipping crate to get some money, or keeping some of them in order to craft with them later, because there's a pretty robust crafting system in this game, split in half between cooking and crafting tools and machines. There's also, of course, livestock. Once you save up enough money, you can buy various livestock pens, and then, of course, the livestock themselves to keep. And this is also very Harvest Moon-esque. You got to go around and poke them every day to make sure that you keep them happy. You got to feed them whatever it is that they need to eat, and they will produce different products. Although in this game, you do not have cows and sheep or things like that. All of the crops and livestock are all fantasy stuff, so they're all very odd and interesting creatures. Like, for instance, the woolums. Woolums are like milkable elk llamas, is the best way I can put it. They're very strange creatures, but they provide milk every day, and also once you get them happy enough, they'll start providing wool too, and wool sells for quite a bit, which makes them pretty valuable to keep around. And of course you can then use the various machines that you can craft in order to process the raw ingredients of your crops into more advanced forms that are worth more money or can be used in better cooking recipes and stuff. So you can turn milk into cheese in a cheese maker, or you can turn berries into jam in a jam machine. You can even spend a couple of days smoking meat, which makes it extremely valuable and also available for very high-tier recipes later on. As you make money, you'll want to go to the main sort of central village that you have access to, which is called Lathe, and this village has a general store that will always stock some of the more basic seeds of whatever season it currently is, as well as some other useful things like some basic ingredients for just like low-level cooking, some backpack upgrades so you can hold more items, but these do get very expensive, and there's also a blacksmith in the village that you can find quite easily that you can bring various materials and a good amount of money to, and they will upgrade your multi-tool to allow it to do more damage in whatever form it takes. So it's a weapon upgrade for it. You and all of your party members as well can have weapon upgrades to enhance your capabilities in the dungeon parts of the game. And finally, there's also a renovator that allows you to expand your farm, so you can have more than one plot available, which you'll definitely want over time, as well as, of course, allowing you to build more advanced structures like pens for livestock. There's also a pretty expansive world map that the game has with a whole bunch of different areas for you to traverse to. Traversing does take time as you do it, although you do eventually gain access to a mount. If you have enough money for it, it's quite expensive, but the mount allows you to traverse much faster so that you can actually make your way around to the various farther off reaches of the map without spending as much time to get there, which is important because time is at a premium in this game. You have to be home by midnight or you will pass out. So time is your main limiting factor, limiting what you can actually do each day. You do have a stamina gauge and everything takes stamina, but interestingly enough, you actually don't pass out when you run out of stamina in this game like you do in a lot of life sim games. Instead, you just fill it up by eating. And there's also that stomach-shaped gauge in the bottom left of the screen there, and that will fill up as you eat foods. And as long as there's some in that gauge, your stamina will actually regenerate. So food is extremely important in this game because you don't have enough stamina to do all the things that you'd want to do during the day. So you need food to actually restore your stamina and set it to be able to regenerate if you want to actually fill your day with a lot of stuff, especially if you're doing a dungeon delving section, because fighting takes a lot of stamina. At different corners of the map, you'll also find season-themed towns, like the spring town, which is surrounded by cherry blossoms, or the summer town, which is all built on coral and like a beach theme. These towns are really pretty, honestly, and they all have a lot of themed stuff to them. So for instance, like I mentioned, the general store in the main town will sell some basic seeds of whatever season it currently is. Well, if you want more of the advanced seeds for that season, then you go to one of these towns, and that's where you'll actually get them. Each town also has an inn, and next to the innkeeper will be an NPC that will accept various dishes that you can cook from recipe books you can buy of the store of that particular town, and they give you a ton of money when you give them these, so that's absolutely worth doing, and it encourages you to cook a lot more stuff than you otherwise would just for yourself. A couple of other interesting mechanics to the farming section of the game. For one, there are biomes that you can actually have access to as you progress the story, and these are special planting areas that grow things you can't plant anywhere else. So for instance, there's an underwater biome that allows you to plant seeds that actually need to be underwater at all times. This is really useful because it means you don't have to water them every day because they're already covered in water. There's also a cave biome, for instance, that allows you to plant a lot of like peppers and stuff that grows in the dark. And the other neat thing is there are these fairies that'll show up that are very sassy and don't seem to respect you all that much. And these fairies, whom you can actually name, by the way, so you can have the last laugh, they'll help you out on the farm once you get them. You get them from completing the main story important dungeons one at a time. But while they're there, you'll get this floating, cool-looking book in your house, and these are fairy orders. These are various different long-term goals that you can accomplish, like, harvest 50 of this crop or repair 10 ladders in dungeons and stuff like that. And as you complete these, you will level up your affinity with that particular fairy. There are 4 in total, and each one gives you all sorts of different benefits, from chargeable tools allowing you to till more ground at once or water a bunch of squares at one time and things like that to help save on stamina, and also new recipes for crafting machines, like that aforementioned jam maker and dessert maker and the smoker and all that sort of stuff. You get all that from doing the fairy orders. And then there's the JRPG half of the game where you actually go out and battle things. And the battle system in this game is relatively simple, but it is quite fun, probably because there's a good amount of variety to it, because it actually uses the Final Fantasy job system. You have a bunch of different jobs you can switch between, and you can have 3 of them equipped at any given time on the D-pad, so you can just switch in mid-fight to any of the classes that you have equipped. Every class can have several different active abilities as well as a different basic attack combo they can do. And all the classes are quite different from each other, which is cool, and you even get job points as you kill enemies, and you can spend these job points on these constellation-like job trees that will unlock and enhance various abilities for each job, although the final third of each job's skill tree is generally limited behind getting your reputation or your relationship up to a certain threshold with different characters, because every job is actually from one of those characters. So as you expand that character's personal quests and stuff, you'll eventually get access to the most crazy stuff that job can offer. There are various large field areas that you can traverse through. Once you beat them once, you can actually walk through them on the world map, so you don't have to go through them every single time, which is nice. But they are quite large, and they have several resource nodes that you can mine or harvest from, and a bunch of elite enemies you might want to come back for, and hidden treasure chests and bombable walls and stuff like that that you can eventually return to those areas for later once you have the resources to deal with all those things and get a bunch of loot and stuff. And then there are the actual main story dungeons, and these are very involved. If you're expecting the JRPG side of this game to be be like kind of a write-off, to be just like a small, watered-down version of an RPG. It is not. These dungeons are very large, and they take several in-game days to actually go through all the way. These are like 5+ floor dungeons with a whole bunch of fast travel points and stuff, and a lot of unlockable shortcuts like bridges you can repair or ladders that you can repair, and each dungeon also has its own sort of gimmick. Like, say the spring dungeon has a lot of wind stuff, so you can like ride the wind and actually float over gaps and things like that, whereas the winter dungeon has a ton of frozen stuff that you can freeze and unfreeze to block and unblock certain passages. It's different for each one, but that gives each dungeon its own unique feel, and the dungeon delving is actually really fun in this game because of that, because they're so large and complex, and there's a lot to do in them, a lot of stuff to find, and a lot of hidden stuff as well, like treasure chests that you wouldn't necessarily think to look for, or, like I mentioned earlier, the bombable walls and repairable bridges and things, allowing you to use some of your farm resources to craft things that make you better at actually dungeon delving as well, so that the two halves of the game don't feel like completely separate things that are at odds with one another, but instead actually enhance each other. And one thing I've got to give the game a lot of credit for, its boss fights are really genuinely good. Like, they're really fun boss fights because they use like MMO raid boss mechanics. They are not like you just sit there and wail on them until they die kind of boss fights. They have all sorts of mechanics they use in these big story important bosses, with all sorts of attacks on the ground that you have to make sure you're not standing in, to variously shaped attacks that you have to avoid. And also, each boss has some other more complex mechanics as well, like one boss that takes place on a bunch of floating platforms and will actually sweep huge damage across certain platforms at certain times, so you have to make sure you're not on those and actually jumping around the platforms to avoid his big like party insta-kill attacks, or a character that spawns a bunch of ads that you have to power down before he uses a big like ult attack, and if you don't power them down in time, it'll basically kill the whole party, but if you do power them down in time, it'll only do small damage to everyone, like raid damage style. So these bosses are really involved, and they're genuinely really well designed. Overall, because of the robust job system, the fun boss fights, and the generally pretty enjoyable dungeon delving experience, the combat side of this game is really solid, and you do have several different party members that you can choose to take with you as well that will all represent their specific jobs when you use them, and you can upgrade them separately and all that stuff. So it is a pretty involved JRPG-like section. It doesn't feel vestigial. It doesn't feel like it's just there to like tick a box. It actually has enough mechanics to stand on its own. Story-wise, I was actually really surprised because I expected the story of this game to be a very cliche Harvest Moon-y kind of thing, but it's really not at all. The story is actually a lot better than I expected, and is actually quite sad as well. There are a lot of really sad moments in the story, especially a lot of the individual character stories, but it's well written, and they actually have a good amount of like emotional impact to them, and the story is actually quite interesting. It goes in a lot of directions I didn't think that it would go. Things are getting really weird, especially at the end of each of the big story-important dungeons. A lot of the reveals and stuff that happens in those areas are genuinely interesting and make for a really memorable story. So I gotta say that I didn't expect the story to be as good as it is, and without wanting to spoil anything, the story and characters in this game really aren't bad. But after having said a lot of good things about it, what is that big major criticism that I talked about? Well, it's the simple fact that this game costs too much. It is $60, and there is no excuse for it to be $60. The game is good, in my opinion, and it does what it sets out to do very well. Both of the halves of the game are well produced and fun to engage in, but that price makes you expect stuff that isn't there, right? That is a AAA big-time game price, but this is not a AAA big-time game content-wise kind of experience, right? This is a smaller experience. It is fun, I like it, but there's just no reason that it should cost that much, and it makes it a little bit hard to recommend because I know that it really shouldn't cost this much, even though I've had a good time with it. If this game was like $30 or $40, I would have zero qualms with recommending it. I would say that if you're a fan of Rune Factory, or if you're a fan of like life sim games and you want something a little bit different, this is genuinely good, and it has a lot of good aspects to it, and the story is better than I thought. But man, $60 is a hard sell, you know? Like, a lot of the games in this genre, actually literally every other game in this genre, does not cost that much. And it makes it a lot more difficult to look at it by comparison and say that it justifies the cost, because even though there's nothing wrong with it, it doesn't do anything badly, that price makes you expect more than what's here. So my personal verdict is, wait for a sale. This is actually a good game to get on sale, not because it does something badly and the sale brings it down to a more palatable price, but because a sale will bring a good game down to the price that it should have been in the first place. So that is my personal view on Harvestella, a genuinely good game with some surprising elements that is brought down a bit by the fact that it simply costs too much by default. Thank you guys very much for watching. The link to this game's Steam store page will be in the description below this video if you would like to check it out for yourselves. And I'll see you guys next time.